This is the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom show, the wake-up call on WCOM LP, Chapel Hill in Carver, 103.5 on your FM dial, or live streaming at WCOMFM.org. You can also watch the show on the People's Channel after a week's delay on Thursday night at 10 p.m., Friday morning at 6 a.m., or Tuesday at noon. The show will also be available on our YouTube channel, Wilf Wake Up Call. I'm Iris Schwinzer here with our host, Lori Hoyt, Emily O'Hara on the camera. Today our special guest is Patrick O'Neill.
Thanks, Iris. So we're here again on a beautiful Wednesday afternoon, and we're delighted to have an old and dear friend who's been doing a lot of exciting things, Patrick O'Neill from the Catholic Worker House in Apex? Garner, and also with Plowshares. So there's a lot to talk about Plowshares and what actions they've been taking. And Patrick, I'm so glad you came.
Well, I'm honored to be here with all of you, and thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, well, I bumped into you at the Farm Labor Organizing Committee when we had an action a couple of weeks ago.
Right at the Circle K headquarters.
Yes, trying to
Support the flock boycott.
yes, and pressure Reynolds Tobacco by boycotting their Vuse e-cigarette that's getting a lot of young people ensnared. So it was a beautiful Sunday afternoon, was it Wednesday afternoon? It was a beautiful afternoon. It was a Tuesday afternoon. And a beautiful day to protest. There was about 40 or more of us outside, and I was so glad to see Patrick. I hadn't seen him in a while, and asked him to come on the show, and here you are.
Well, I thought I would introduce myself. The father of Charlie Mulholland Catholic Worker House that my wife and I, and a Dominican sister, Kitty Bethay, and my daughter Bernadette founded in 1991, a House of Hospitality, an intentional pacifist community. We provide hospitality to women and children in crisis. And we started that house after my wife finished up at the School of Social Work here in Chapel Hill. We've had it ever since, and we also do a lot of work for peace and justice, as Lori mentioned. And we have 8 children. My wife's name is Mary Ryder, and we have 8 children. And I tell people that I only require 3 things of my children. None of them about what time they go to bed or how they do in school, but only that they go to church with me on Sunday, get arrested with me, and love each other. If they do those 3 things, they're in good standing. And I turned 63 last week. I had my 63rd birthday. And sometimes I'm sad to go to demonstrations, and for 40 years I've been the youngest person there.
And is it changing?
Not as much as I wish, actually.
No, yeah, it's still a lot of us older people holding the fort.
Right.
Yeah, but your kids are filling in the gap, and there's some other young people also, but you're right, we need more of them. So.
Well, the reason that Lori and I discussed coming on the show was because of my belief in nonviolent direct action as a means to achieve world peace and other things, but basically as a tactic, I guess. Nonviolent direct action, and it's been pretty successful in North Carolina. I think of the Moral Monday action, which you and I are co-defendants of, and we're more than 1,000 people, most of them from the Triangle, but all over the state. People came from very far away to support the response to the North Carolina General Assembly's basically deciding to no longer practice democracy as a body. But people understand nonviolent direct action as a tactic, and I've been involved in nonviolent direct action, I guess, since 1982, when I was arrested at Fort Bragg, when Fort Bragg was, the Army there was training El Salvadoran death squads. So that was my first arrest at Fort Bragg in 1982 is how many years ago? I know it's a lot.
Yeah.
37 years ago.
So that was when you started, and you opened up the Catholic Worker House in 71, did you?
No, 91.
91.
Right.
Okay, so you had started your subversive actions before you opened the Catholic Worker House, and
Well, that was part of our subversive action.
yeah.
Living in intentional, nonviolent community and practicing hospitality and nonviolence. That's part of the movement. Yeah.
And I think you had as far as I know, the first Catholic Worker House in North Carolina that I know.
Well, you know, Silk Hope Catholic Worker in Chatham
That was
County.
after you.
Lenore and Steve opened around the same time as us, maybe a year or two
No,
later.
it was
yeah.
after you, because
Yeah.
I'd heard about you and your
Yeah,
house.
I don't know for the first one, but that's
Yeah,
possible.
I think
There's a
so.
lot of communities here now, though, with ties to the Catholic Worker.
Yes,
had a lot
it's a
more.
growing movement. And maybe you could just give us a very brief definition for some people who don't know what a Catholic Worker House is.
Well, Dorothy Day was a Catholic pacifist, a convert to Catholicism, who in 1933 opened the first Catholic Worker House in what, I guess for lack of a better word, was Skid Row. It was the Lower East Side of Manhattan, which was known as the Bowery. And of course, 1933, you remember, was right at the onset of the Depression, and things were bad then. The economy was bad, and she wanted to provide hospitality to people who were struggling. And she was also a pacifist, so Dorothy also practiced nonviolent direct action. In fact, she was an early opponent of World War II. You know, in 1940 or 39, whatever she was speaking out against the rising tensions at that time. But Dorothy was consistent and always opposed violence in all its forms. And she started the first Catholic Worker House, which when I'm in New York, I stay at the Mother House. There are two houses on the Lower East Side. Joseph House, which is on 1st Street and 2nd Avenue, and Mary House, which is on 3rd Street and 2nd Avenue. And the communities there are 2 apartment buildings there. And ironically, Dorothy, I think, bought the houses for like 50 grand or something, and they're worth millions now. Because it's no longer Skid Row. The Bowery is now gentrified, and there's Starbucks on every corner of Manhattan. I mean, there's not much of Manhattan left that's not gentrified, really. You gotta really go to the Bronx before you can find rent for less than $1,000, and I can't even imagine you'll find much of that in the Bronx. So the Catholic Worker started doing a soup kitchen. They still have their soup kitchens at Mary House and Joseph House. And when I was arrested in Kings Bay, Georgia last year, a year ago, for the action I'm going to talk about.
Which is one of the big things we're going to be talking about.
Yeah, well, one of my co-defendants is a woman named Martha Hennessy, who is Dorothy Day's granddaughter. And she would very much, I had the privilege of meeting Dorothy Day and going to her wake and funeral at Mary House in 1980. And Martha would remind you in almost every way of her grandmother: appearance, all physical attributes, and her perseverance and her strength as an anti-war activist.
Yeah, that was very impressive. Martha Hennessy, who we're just talking about, and Patrick, and the 2 other Plowshares people were just on Amy Goodman's Democracy Now! Program on Monday, and which I was very excited to see that Amy covered it, a pretty large segment, giving a really good shout out for you guys. And another mutual friend of ours, Francis Coyle, worked on the farm that supplied the vegetables for that soup kitchen in New York
That's right.
years ago.
Yeah, Frank Coyle worked on the Catholic Worker Farm after he got out of the service for World War II. He joined the Catholic Workers. So.
Yeah, he did.
Yeah.
So should we come up to the present, so we don't get with all these stories and lose track of why the main impetus why you're here right now, which is getting arrested in Plowshares nonviolent activity in Kings Bay, Georgia. So tell us about that.
Well, on the 50th anniversary of Martin Luther King's assassination, which was April 4th of last year, we just passed the 51st anniversary, I joined 6 others, including Martha Hennessy. Phil Berrigan and Elizabeth McAllister were two of the most important faith-based activists against the Vietnam War in the 60s. And Phil Berrigan, of course, died in 2002. His wife, Elizabeth, is 79. She was one of our co-defendants, Martha and I. And also Father Steve Kelly, who's a prominent Jesuit theologian who was selected by the Jesuit religious order, which is known as the Society of Jesus, to deliver Dan Berrigan's final mass as eulogy and celebrate the mass, the funeral mass for Dan in New York City at St. Xavier Catholic Church. And Father Kelly turned 70 in jail, and Elizabeth McAllister turned 79. Although I'm out of jail, both Elizabeth McAllister and Father Steve Kelly have stayed in jail, so they've now been in jail in South Georgia in the Glenn County Jail for more than a year, as has Mark Colville from New Haven, Connecticut, who was a Catholic worker who committed this action with us. And Martha Hennessy and I are out, as are Claire Grady and Carmen Trotta, who are also two Catholic workers from New York. Claire is in Ithaca, and Carmen is at the Mother House, well, the Father House, I guess, Joseph House in New York. So on the anniversary of King's assassination, the seven of us cut a lock to get on the base of the Naval Station Kings Bay. Naval Station Kings Bay is the home port to the most insidious and obscene weapon system ever built in the history of the world, the Trident II submarine, which fires D5 missiles. D5 missiles are each missile, and there's let's just put it this way: if you were to do the math, looking at the Hiroshima bomb, now the Hiroshima atomic bomb was a very primitive bomb, but if you would look at the kilotonnage of the bomb that we dropped on Hiroshima, and just multiply the kilotonnage of the Trident fleet, it would be enough to kill 14 billion people. Now, keep in mind, if you know your population numbers, 14 billion is almost twice the population of planet Earth. And one would have to ask themselves why one of our weapon systems, now we have sea-launched nuclear weapons, air-launched nuclear weapons out of bombers and fighter jets, and we have ICBMs, land-based nuclear weapons, and some that move around. So we have three sets of nuclear options. So Trident is just one subset of the set of sea-launched missiles, and that weapon system itself can kill almost twice the population of the planet. Now, I'd ask her, if I could, I'd ask for a show of hands, who voted for that?
Exactly.
Who decided that we needed a weapon system to be complemented by dozens of other weapon systems when we have the capacity to literally end the human experiment? And that's unfortunately what we're facing as a human family. And the combination of the nuclear arms race, which is really growing right now.
It's heating up.
And heating up a lot because of the rhetoric of the president. We live in dangerous times. And what makes our times especially dangerous is the fact that nobody seems to care. It's interesting, if you look at how the government responded to the nuclear arms race when it really kicked off in the 50s, when the Soviet Union got their nuclear weapons, there was this real sense of you should fear the nuclear arms race. We should take preventive measures against it. We should go down in the subways in New York City when you hear the air raid sirens, and you should partake of these life-saving events. And people built all these bomb shelters in their yards. So there was a real sense of, wow, these are dangerous times. Well, cut ahead a half a century, and what you have now is the government's basically saying, don't worry about anything. Just leave it in our hands. We'll take care of everything. So what you have is basically a general citizenry, not just in our country, but this is the same all over the world, of the 9 nuclear nations. Don't worry, just trust the government. And of course, the government's policy, as you may think back to some of the rhetoric you remember in the 80s, you don't even hear this term that often, but the actual policy that guides nuclear policy for the United States is known as MAD. It's an appropriate acronym, MAD, for mutually assured destruction. The thinking behind that is that nuclear weapons don't really represent a threat because everybody has them, and everybody knows that if they were used, it would be suicide all around, right? So basically, this is what this is what we're laying our hopes on, is that somehow mutually assured destruction as a policy will go on in perpetuity for all of humanity, that it'll never change, and that somehow we'll just be able to hold this thing in abeyance for all of history, with thousands and thousands of nuclear weapons around. And incidentally, it's important to know, the United States does not have a no first use policy when it comes to nuclear weapons. And Donald Trump is reassessing the nuclear protocol, and we now are looking at the possibility of making nuclear weapons an option to respond to non-nuclear threats. So we're talking about people right now. We're on a radio show talking about peace. We're on a TV show talking about peace. People right now are planning the end of the world, and our tax dollars are paying for it. Now, I've been arrested at the Pentagon 7 times. Sometimes people say to me, why do you get arrested at the Pentagon? What was the occasion? I said, well, you don't need an occasion. At the Pentagon, they're planning the end of the world every day. So it would be appropriate if people got arrested there every day.
Wow.
I mean, but think about it. They're literally planning the end of the world. We're talking about peace, and there's a whole bunch of people with a lot of money
And we do
planning the
get
end of the world.
complacent. You're right. We've been hearing about it for so long. It's sort of like, oh, yeah, ho-hum.
Yeah, complacent isn't really the word. It's nuclear, living on hair trigger alert in a nuclear armed world has become normal.
Yeah.
Now I can tell you what happened when we went to Kings Bay. This isn't a small town. This submarine base was brought to Southeast Georgia by President Carter. As you remember, he was a Navy admiral, very pro-nuke. And President Carter brought that submarine base to Southeast Georgia, right on the Florida border, Kings Bay. It's in a little town called St. Mary's, Georgia. And here, we did this action, and I'm thinking, this is what I'm thinking, okay? I'm thinking, I'm with this sort of A-list of Catholic radicals, Dorothy Day's granddaughter, Phil Berrigan's widow, this Jesuit theologian. We're just gonna get a lot of press coverage. Everybody's gonna be all interested in why we're doing this. And then all of a sudden, it's like you got there and nobody showed up. Nobody cared. And I was like, whoa, what's going on here? There was no request for interviews with us. We're in jail, the 7 of us, for hammering on some components inside the thing. I go to it, literally, the Navy has a shrine at Kings Bay.
Oh, tell us about that.
And the shrine is literally, I saw this on Google Maps, and I had this, and what it is a bunch of these huge phallic symbols, nuclear weapons, coming up out of the ground. And it's surrounded by like a cement little display and flags. And I don't know if we're supposed to go there and prostrate ourselves or genuflect. What's the purpose of this display of nuclear weapons? I'm thinking, we're taking down Silent Sam here in Orange County, and here we have these weapons on display like to come and adore. So I went to that, and I called up Shane Claiborne, who lives at a Catholic work-alike house in Philadelphia called The Simple Way. And I said, because I had heard that Shane was working with Quakers and they were making hammers out of melted down guns that people were turning in these gun collections on the streets. And I thought, great, I'm going to hammer on a nuclear idol with a hammer made from guns. So he shipped me a couple in the mail, and I had seen this thing on Google Maps, and what I assumed it probably was just a dummy nuclear weapon. It was probably actually the weapon itself, but it was a dummy, or one that was a test one or something. I would assume it was being made of metal, and I'd be able to poke some holes in it with the hammer, like smashing an idol. Perfect, right? This is idolatry at its absolute glorious worst. So I go running up to the thing in the pre-dawn hours, it's dark, and I cock my arm back with my hammer, and I go whang, and all of a sudden my arm goes, ah! The thing was made out of cement, and the hammerhead broke right off. So it was a formidable idol. I even smacked it with a big sledgehammer, and it didn't do anything.
They wanted those idols to last.
And those idols are still there. We threw blood on them and spray painted "Love Your Enemies," and put some dents in them maybe. But I don't think I don't think we made much of a dent. Let's put it that way. But the point was that we were hoping really that we would actually be able to find a Trident sub, but the Trident subs are usually at sea, ready to blow up the world, so there were none in port. And we waited, to see if one would come in. We kept checking, but none ever came in, so we decided to do the action on the 50th anniversary of King's assassination, because we wanted to sort of talk about King and his speech, which had been, the speech that he gave at Riverside Church,
The
Beyond Vietnam.
The real hard-hitting speech.
It was called Beyond Vietnam, where King gave the famous quote that you'll never hear quoted on his birthday anywhere. The greatest purveyor of violence in the world is my own country. After King said that and withdrew his consent to the Vietnam War in a major way, 150 newspapers, virtually every major city's newspaper in the entire nation of the United States, wrote a critical op-ed or column or editorial about King that day. In fact, he was his least popular time in his movement. And as you know, or maybe you don't know, but a year to the day later, King was assassinated.
And his own colleagues felt he was making a mistake, that he was taking the attention away from the civil rights movement, not wanting to see that connection between militarism and killing and what you're trying to achieve in civil rights and education and all the good stuff. And he went through a dark night of the soul for quite a long time.
Well, if you read King's speeches, you realize that not only was he a theologian, but he was really a political scientist. His assessment of U.S. foreign policy back 50 years ago was spot on. Spot on. He understood U.S. imperialism way before there was the term U.S. imperialism. Yeah. And so King also made famous the triplets: militarism, racism, and materialism. He made those triplets that were the enemies of a good life: militarism, racism, and materialism. So we went there to call attention to that. And Steve Kelly and Elizabeth McAllister and Carmen Trotta, we divided into 3 groups when we got into Kings Bay. And they went to the bunkers where the nuclear weapons were stored and cut through a couple of fences and hung banners. And Claire Grady and Martha Hennessy went to an administrative building where they cordoned it off with crime scene tape and spray painted and threw blood. So, I was expecting to be apprehended very quickly because we were doing this in a well-lit area. But soon police cars started driving by ignoring us. So I was like, there was one of the things about getting involved in a plowshare action of this sort, where you're going onto some nuclear facility in the middle of the night. Some people might argue it's not a very wise thing to do. I'd be willing to argue that you might be right. But anyway, you go there and there's a little bit of an expectation that you might encounter people with guns.
Yes.
And it could be dangerous. And one of the reasons that I went to that monument and not to the bunkers was because I thought, this is calling me here to this monument, but also, the bunkers had guard towers around them that were staffed by Marines. And as soon as the 3 of them got inside that fence line, ATMs, all these all-terrain vehicles, ATVs, they all started pulling up, and people with automatic weapons got out and I think they said there were about 18 armed men with automatic weapons to hold these 3 pacifists, a priest, an ex-nun, and a 60-year-old Catholic worker on the ground for, unarmed. But the point was, I had to say this. When I was walking in, the prayer I kept reciting was, God, let me pass through their midst. God, let me pass through their midst. Because I was really worried that one of us would get hurt. And the way it was so quiet there in the middle of the night that you could have heard a pin drop. And I was always scared I was going to hear a gun go off. And then maybe Father Steve was going to get shot. Or maybe Elizabeth would get shot. And luckily, at one point, when the police were ignoring us, I saw a whole bunch of cop cars with their lights on going down the road toward the bunkers. And it was then that I knew they had been apprehended and I hadn't heard a gunshot. And the thing we were praying for was to be in handcuffs and not dead.
Yes.
So that was part of it. Now, I didn't literally, sometimes people who participate in plowshare actions, and this was not my first one, will write letters to their loved ones in the event of their death. And that seemed a little bit too extreme for me. I wasn't going to do it. I was going to be more optimistic. And here I am. So the government did not appreciate the symbolic nature of my act, smashing an idol and breaking my hammer. So I was charged with conspiracy, a federal felony, carries 5 years. Depredation of government property. Depredate is a very interesting word. I had to look it up. I've been charged with it many times. If you throw blood on the Pentagon, which I've done twice, that's depredating too. Depredate means to lay to waste, to prey upon, or to plunder.
That's a
Depredation means
depredation.
to lay to waste, to prey upon, to plunder. Which I remember in one of my trials, when one of my co-defendants was asked about the charge, he said, "I find it amusing that I'm being charged with depredating the ultimate depredator." We've also been charged with destroying naval property, which was basically the thing I put the dents in. That we hammered on a sign that had the word weapons on it. I mean, really, if the crime would be characterized by the police, I guess they would call it vandalism, but I called it disarmament and smashing idols.
Yes.
I didn't look at it as destructive, except the fact that we're not supposed to worship idols. We're supposed to destroy them, and that they represent. And I mean, an idol to a weapon of mass destruction. There is something wrong with that picture. I mean, that you would actually have a D5 missile, a first strike nuclear weapon facsimile coming up out of the ground that you would take pictures of with your children standing next to it, like.
And flags around it, right?
Flags around it, yeah, it was a holy place.
Okay, we're gonna take a station break.
This is Will's Wake Up Call on WCOM-LP, Chapel Hill and Carver, 103.5 FM. You can stream us live at WCOMFM.org.
And I was just trying to remember if there was any announcements. And I just know that tonight Jerry Marketis with Badge will be going on at 7:30 at the community church on Purefoy Road in Chapel Hill. And they're going to be showing there's a movie playing at the Chelsea right now, Best of Enemies, about Ann Atwater and C.P. Ellis, a Klanman and a black activist back around about 71 also, who were co-leaders of a Save Our Schools program to try to save the schools and try to get them integrated. And they became, although they had been enemies, they became very good friends actually for a long time afterwards. It's a very hopeful story and a very touching story. And so that movie is because they both have died in recent years, and that movie is now playing at the Chelsea. But there was a documentary made about them when they were still alive, and that's what Jerry is showing tonight. And I'll put a little aside. I was there at that Save Our Schools program because I lived in Durham at the time, and I did want to get the schools integrated, and I had kids in the school system. So I met both Ann Atwater and C.P. Ellis. Well, I sat there while they were, I was in the audience, but I'm very proud to have been a little part of that history, which was a very exciting history. So that's tonight at 7:30. I know there's other things going on, but we haven't got them in our memory bank.
Didn't Patrick have something?
Yeah, I can mention
Yeah.
that
Thank
the
you.
annual Pilgrimage for Peace and Justice begins
Yes.
next Sunday, Palm Sunday in Asheville. We'll be making our way toward the Friday gathering at the Capitol on Good Friday at noon. And along the way, we're going to make stops supporting the chicken plant workers in Morganton, North Carolina. We're going to stop in Alamance County on Wednesday, where we're going to go to the Alamance County Detention Center, which is a notorious holding facility for undocumented people who get rounded up in these racial profiling stops by the sheriff in Alamance County. Typically, the people who end up in that Alamance County Detention Center are there for things like having an expired driver's license. So it's a real basically gulag for our undocumented sisters and brothers. We're going to go on Thursday to Johnston County, to the Johnston County Airport, which is home of the CIA's torture taxis.
Yes.
And where the CIA has a whole undercover operation there. But extraordinary rendition basically is centered right there in Johnston County in Smithfield. We'll be going there early in the morning. On Holy Thursday, we'll have a foot washing there and a witness there at the gates. And I've been arrested there a couple of times. I've been arrested at the Alamance County Jail as well, and I had to spend 10 days inside it for a protest outside it. But then we'll go to the Capitol on Good Friday.
Good Friday.
We'll stop at Central Prison and remember the people on death row there, the men on death row there, the women on death row are also in Raleigh at Women's Prison. And we'll have a march that will end at the Capitol and begin, we'll have a Way of the Cross at noon till 2 at the Capitol. So.
And it's a very moving service if you can't do any of the rest to go to the Capitol. It starts at noontime at the Capitol.
That's right.
Yes, as the marchers come in, and this has been going on for several years also.
35 years.
Oh, wow, 35 years.
Yeah, 35
Thank you
years.
for remembering that, since my memory, I didn't write, if I don't write it down, it's lost. So, yeah, I recommend it. It's wonderful to do, and a wonderful way to prepare yourself for Easter Sunday.
Yeah, and the woman who started the pilgrimage, Gail Ferris, is one of the truly greatest North Carolina activists. You know, she came to activism having been a missionary, a Maryknoll missionary in Latin America as a young woman. She left the religious order, but she kept her activism up. Gail has led more than 60 delegations of North Americans throughout Latin America to go and visit those countries and learn about the impact of U.S. policy and U.S. militarism on every country in Latin America. So Gail is really a stalwart leader and one of the most remarkable people I've mentored under in my life in North Carolina.
You Google Witness for Peace is the organization
Witness for Peace Southeast.
that she started, Witness for Peace Southeast. Yeah, and she was also at the Farm Labor Organizing Committee that day.
Right.
She's still out there protesting just like you are, just like many are. So back to your action in Kings Bay.
Well, it took a long time for them to arrest all of us, but eventually they did. But you know, here we were. We sort of one of the things that I've done in the plaster actions that I've been in 2, and I've assisted in several others as an unindicted co-conspirator. But what a lot of times the actors do is literally they play out role play scenarios. If you're encountered by somebody with a gun, how do you convey a message of nonviolence? What if it's dark? You know, they don't know if you have weapons or who you are. So we practice that. We role play that in the dark, like, you know, to kind of do that. And so one of the things that we yelled to the police when we were at the shrine is, "We are nonviolent. We come in peace. We have no weapons," to let them know. So I was pleased when this one cop comes moseying up to us. A few cop cars pulled up, but this one cop comes walking up to us, and his name turned up to be, I don't know if he was sergeant or what his position was, but his name was Carter. And he just walked up and he got about, I don't know, 20 or 30 feet from us, and he said, "You guys know that you're in a bit of trouble here." So he didn't say, like, "Get down on your," he didn't pull a gun on us. So I thought, okay, well, our nonviolence worked, at least in that regard. So we were held in, you know, unpleasant conditions all through the night in handcuffs, cross-examined. You know, it was like one of these things out of a TV show. And apparently there's some TV show that's based on the real group that interviewed us, the police, NC something, FI or something. It's some TV show that has an acronym of 4 letters. And these guys interviewed us, and I asked them who they were, and he said, "Well, don't you watch TV?" And I said, "Well, no." So apparently there's a show about the people who interviewed us, Naval Intelligence or something. But we were in handcuffs up all night long, you know, being questioned. So it was daylight before they finally took us to jail. It was now April 5th. And it turned out that the state of Georgia charged us with a bunch of charges first. And the magistrate would not let us out on bond. We were too dangerous to the community, so we were held without bond. And that was for 7 weeks. And then when the feds indicted us, we got a bond hearing, and then that's when I was able to call up my cousin who had some money, and I said, Ed, can you put up he's a banker, he supports me, but he says if I got arrested I'd lose my job. So he put up the $5,000 to get me out, and I had to wear this, and people on the radio can't see it, but people on TV can. I have to wear an ankle monitor, so I'm under house arrest, and I'm sort of tethered to the government. This is your tax dollars at work. For the listeners on the radio, I'm showing the ankle monitor off, which you can't see. But basically, I've had this on for 10 months now, and that was the criteria to get out. And one of the reasons that Father Steve wouldn't get out and Liz wouldn't get out and Mark wouldn't get out is because they didn't want to agree to those conditions. So you had to put up $5,000 in cash, and you had to put up. Then there was also $45,000 more unsecured. So the bond is actually $50,000. So they take $55,000, and if you come back for trial, they give it back to you. Now the ironic thing is, okay, and I'll lay this out because I think it's worth understanding what it's like down there. We had a priest come visit us from the church in St. Mary's, the Catholic Church. Now, what I'd heard was he'd already been preaching against us. But someone had requested, Father, there are 7 Catholics, including a priest and a nun, in the jail. Would you go visit them? And he said, okay. And he was a nice man. He's actually from Poland originally. He's bilingual. And he'd been down at this parish in Kings Bay for 4 years. And he came to visit us, and he was kind of a stoic, formal guy. And if you know anything about Catholic Eucharistic ministry, you come in, you do a prayer, he gives you Holy Communion. They bring the Eucharist in, give it to you, they have kind of a service. Not a full Mass, but a communion service. He's able to give you the Eucharist. And he came, and I kept thinking, because he was so formulaic, I thought, he's just going to do this, and he's going to say, God bless you, and hit the road. I mean, he's just going to fulfill his pastoral responsibilities and get out of there as fast as possible. But the interesting thing was that he was a lot more curious about us than I thought. And he said, well, and he was only meeting with the 4 of us. He couldn't meet with all 7. The women he had to meet with separately. So I was with the 4 men. And of course, Father Steve Kelly's a Jesuit theologian. So he speaks the same language as this priest who went to seminary. And one of the things he said to us, he said, you guys have given me a bit of trouble because the people at my church in St. Mary's don't understand how 7 Roman Catholics can break into the submarine base, damage government property, and claim to be doing it all in the name of Jesus. And he said, and I don't know what to tell them. So he didn't get it. That's interesting right there.
Yeah.
So, but the nice thing was he spent 30 minutes listening to us. Yeah. And the 4 of us sort of gave him our spiel, like I'm giving my spiel now, telling the story.
Yeah.
But telling the story from a kind of a basic sense. Why would 7 people do this? Why would they risk their lives, risk their freedom? What motivates you to do a thing like this? Mm-hmm. Because keep in mind that in Kings Bay, Georgia, the base is the sacred cow. It's the economic, gigantic, improvement of this community. It's brought all this industry in. It's brought all these engineers and all of this money. Just this huge outpouring, billions and billions of dollars for this horrific weapon of mass destruction. Nobody sees anything bad about it. It's a source of pride to everybody there.
So I hope you will tell our listening audience too why you all did it.
Yeah, I will. And so anyway, the priest says, okay, I appreciate you telling me this. And he posts something on his, an email that he sent out, basically saying he wished us the best. That there was some meaning to what we did. He didn't say I'm in the next action with him, but it was clear that he got it theologically and politically. He understood at least what we were about. So that was good. But here's the $64,000 question. This priest is sitting in his rectory, just a few hundred yards away from the harbor, watching Trident submarines, which are 2 football fields long. All right, we're talking 200 yards. To see one of these things would be the equivalent of like the Goodyear blimp pulling into the parking lot here at the Carver Arts Center. It would be an overwhelming sight. This thing is a scene. It's obscene, right? So to see this thing floating by in the harbor, and for 4 years, this guy has been the spiritual leader of this community, right? And never once did it occur to him that the entire livelihood and the economy of the community he lives in is based on the end of the world. It never occurred to him that this is what this is about. This isn't about economics. This is about the end of the world. That's what we're playing with. We're toying with the human experiment. And it never occurred to him. Now, God bless him. It doesn't occur to most people. He's not alone in that regard. The church embraces militarism. The church embraces war. You know, despite the fact that Pope Francis is changing, at least the guy at the top.
At least.
He's saying now, Francis, two interesting things that Francis has said is he's completely eliminated any Catholic approval for the death penalty. The death penalty was not unallowed under any circumstances. He has now completely said it's morally unacceptable. And he said now, not only are the use of nuclear weapons unacceptable, but the possession of them and the manufacture of them are immoral. So the rules are changing. Now that doesn't mean it's going to trickle down to the priest in the pulpit. But the point is, there are some people aware of how insane this is. Okay? There are people aware of that. So, as a father of 8 children, what kind of legacy am I leaving my children? Global warming, cataclysmic climate change that could result in huge environmental migration of people leaving the shorelines all over the United States, and militarism being the primary cause of global warming. Militarism is the biggest user of fossil fuels, the largest carbon footprint. To fly even one F-15 jet at Seymour Johnson Air Force Base costs practically $10,000 an hour just for the fuel. The obscenity of this, and look at this car lot here, all full of Priuses. Everybody trying to get 50 miles to the gallon while the government is squandering literally millions of gallons of fuel on building weapons of mass destruction and flying them around in the sky and under the water everywhere. So as a father of 8 children, but just as someone who cares about creation, you know, I love creation. I love the world. Who doesn't love going to the North Carolina beaches or going to the North Carolina mountains? Who doesn't love this wonderful world we live in? And here we are literally putting it at risk of total devastation. There are many people who believe that scientists who believe that if all nuclear weapons in the world were used, it would be a more significant disaster than the meteor, the asteroid that hit planet Earth and ended the dinosaurs' legacy, which apparently blacked out the sun's energy and light for years and years and years. So we're talking about something of unimaginable horror. We've got to talk about it. We have got to talk about it. And we've got to say, right now under Obama, President Obama, that liberal president that we had, there was a $1.2 trillion approval for a complete reconditioning of our entire nuclear arsenal. And Trump is picking that right up.
Yeah.
Now that's under a liberal president. $1.2 trillion, a 30-year plan to update, because what you realize now is since most of our nuclear weapons have been around since the 60s and 70s, they're reaching the end of their functionality, so to speak. Not that we could approve their function, but they have to be refitted, they have to be, updated. So we're spending $1.2 trillion to bring the nuclear arms race well past the middle of the century, into up to 2050 now.
And they're also talking about making smaller ones so they could be
Tactical nuclear weapons.
So that, yes, it'd be much more apt to use them, because they say, oh, well, this would just be a little small skirmish, just and that is terrifying. That is terrifying because they know not what they do. They really don't.
I've had a column that I wrote, accepted in the News and Observer, which it may be out this week or it might be next week. I use it when they have room. But one of the points I raise in there is that when nuclear weapons are used, not if nuclear weapons are used, when nuclear weapons are used. And think about this now, because we are in the digital age, computers basically have taken over nuclear weapons. Now the risk of nuclear war could be because of an accident. I mean, literally a mistake. Some kind of a mistake in the technology could result in an accidental exchange of nuclear weapons, or nuclear weapons being launched by mistake, or the Soviet or Russia thinking that our nuclear weapons are coming towards them because of a mistake in their system, which detects them. Right. So we're looking at that. We're also looking at the possibility of a group, of terrorists getting a nuclear weapon and using it. Not to mention the fact that Donald Trump talks about the use of nuclear weapons in like common conversation. We're talking about the possibility of using nuclear weapons. The point is, folks, these weapons aren't props. They're real and they represent Armageddon. So one of the things I said that I would hope make people think, in 1993, terrorists attacked the World Trade Center. They set off a bomb in a big truck underneath in one of the sub-bases of the World Trade Center. The bomb turned out not to be big enough to affect the structure of the building. Had it been, it would have toppled over the World Trade Center 8 years before the 2001 attack. But the thing that's really horrific about the World Trade Center attack in 2001 is nobody saw it coming. Nobody saw it coming. Even though 8 years prior, terrorists had gone into the basement of the World Trade Center and blew up a bomb that I think killed 5 or 6 people and did a huge amount of damage, not enough to bring the building down, which was what the terrorists had hoped. But here comes 2001. We wake up on the morning of September 11th and watch the news, and the towers collapse. And nobody was ready for that. So what's going to happen when one of the nuclear weapons is used? Are we all going to just be surprised by that? You know, I sent an op-ed piece to the Atlanta Constitution and to the Jacksonville paper, 2 of the biggest papers close to where our action was. I'm a writer. I'm not a great writer, but I'm a writer. And I sent op-eds to both of those papers, and the op-ed editors turned them down. Didn't run them. They weren't interested. And I said, you know, we're here trying to call attention to possibly the greatest threat to the human family, to God's creation that there ever was, and you don't think it's worth writing about. You don't even have to write it. I'll give you the thing for free. But the point is they didn't cover it. Now, this is what I want to say about that area down there in South Georgia and northern Florida. Some of my co-defendants think it's a media blackout. They don't want to cover us because we're just too radical. They don't want to tell the story. I don't think so. I think they don't care. I think the editors sit around and decide what's newsworthy and to decide that protesting nuclear weapons isn't newsworthy. It's not something to cover. In our court appearances down there, the 7 of us, we have had more supporters in the courtroom than any day journalists. We've only had 1 newspaper reporter that's come from a small local paper in Brunswick, Georgia, where the jail and the courthouse are, that has regularly covered our court appearances. No TV cameras, no nothing. How can people be so disinterested in this? Just like the priest. Never thought about it. Never thought about it. So that's really one of the reasons why, and one of the things we did is we used high drama, right?
Yeah.
You know, busting into the place, swinging the hammers,
Yeah.
pouring the blood. This is high drama. And so there's really a theatrical component to this, but that's intentional.
Yeah, of
And
course.
let's look at 2 incidents in history that are perfect examples of high drama that have been used very successfully. Ever heard of the Boston Tea Party? Okay, the Boston Tea Party is pretty fascinating, right? Because the people who engage in the Boston Tea Party are basically fighting over the issue of taxation without representation. So the colonists who did the Boston Tea Party, who participated in it, destroyed a lot of tea, tons of tea, in fact, that would have been worth in the millions of dollars in today's current market. That tea was destroyed because of taxation without representation. And the people who participated, many of them dressed up in Native American costumes so they wouldn't even reveal their identity. They weren't even accepting responsibility for what they did. But you'll never read any historical account of the Boston Tea Party and not hear those people called patriots. Now that was civil disobedience to the max, right? And it was high drama to the max. Now that's looked at a wonderful patriotic act of opposition to English imperialism at that time. And then we look at Jesus cleansing the temple of the money changers. A great story, which happens a week before he's executed. Now, Jesus goes in, the money changers are there. It's a complex theological story, but the bottom line is there are people in there taking advantage of the poor in the temple. Jesus gets outraged, he overturns their tables, takes all their animals and drives them out. My temple is not a den of thieves. And of course, many theologians, probably the vast majority of them, say Jesus did that and that sealed his fate. He was crucified a week later. Now the point is, if you remember when the woman was caught in adultery, what did Jesus do? He sits down on the ground and he draws a mob, right? A mob of men, nobody accepting responsibility for having done business with the adulterer. But they say to Jesus, well, this woman was caught in adultery. Well, where's the man? But anyway, the point is, she's caught in adultery, and the law is that she be stoned to death. what do you have to say about this, Jesus? So Jesus goes down on the ground and he's writing in the dirt. Nobody knows what he's writing. I think he's just biding time, figuring out what am I going to say to this mob, right? To this mob. And he gets up and he says, let he who is without sin cast the first stone. First stone, one by one by one. They all go away, ashamed. And then the woman says, he says to the woman, is no one left here to condemn you? And he says, no one's here except me, and I don't condemn you, I forgive you. Now, the point I'm making about that theologically is Jesus could have also shamed the money changers out of the temple. He chose a different tactic. High drama, theatrics. Sometimes it's appropriate. When everybody's asleep at the nuclear wheel, sometimes we need to jolt people alive. And that's what we did.
And, you know, and would that it had been more successful, because you're right, I mean, you're saying that you still didn't get that much publicity for it. And that's what's so tragic, because not that many years ago, what was 1 million people in Central Park protesting?
1982.
Yeah,
I missed that because I was in prison.
yeah.
I have served almost 3 years in
my-
jail and prison in my life.
My sister was there, who just recently passed, who's a nun, you know, and I'm here in North Carolina, so I didn't go with 5 kids. You have 8, I've got 5. But this was the height of all over. People were protesting, people were afraid. So how have they managed to lull us? And even though the scenario you talked about, the possible accidents, there have been some. There was a time when there was a scramble over Norway or someplace. There was some.
Very recently in Hawaii.
Oh, really? I didn't even know that.
Yeah, they thought there were incoming nuclear weapons coming to Hawaii. That happened last year. But these things are called broken arrows, the mistakes. And a B-52 bomber that had been based at Seymour Johnson Air Force Base back when it was a strategic command base. They had a bomb fall off the B-52 in Faro, Wayne County, Faro, North Carolina.
Yeah.
They never recovered it.
Oh, I thought it was around Greensboro, but I know.
No, it was in Faro, North Carolina, which is in Wayne County.
And you know, so terrible mistakes have happened that we are just by the skin of our teeth did not have Armageddon at that point. And so even then, and now with increased use of technology and digital this and that and the other, we're at an even increased risk. And yet that we are all lulled. How they have been so clever to, I guess because it's gone on so long and nothing's happened, I guess people feel, well, we've got to
Yeah,
play with this.
73 years of mutually assured destruction, it works.
Yeah, that must be part of it.
It has to be part of it because
Yeah.
how else can you explain it? Now,
How
if you
else?
give a talk at a college, like I sometimes speak over at NC State or at Carolina or
Yeah.
somewhere else, and you go into a classroom and you speak, you realize that the kids that you're speaking to have grown up in endless war. They've never known our country not in war. So you don't realize that. But teenagers today only know life as a constant war, right? They don't know that there was a time when we weren't, engaging in war all over the world. We do have 200 foreign bases. 200 foreign bases. So the United States is the global empire, and we're engaged in warfare. We're dropping these drone bombs on people. We're making war a lot cleaner from the perspective of not having to have boots on the ground.
Yes, and that's it. If we had the draft, not that I want the draft to come back, but I'm just saying, when it was your neighbor, your kid, your husband could be taken at any time off to the military, that keeps it very alive in people's mind. And now it's out of our mind. You forget where it's sanitized. It's out. It's over there, and how to bring that.
But the thing is that war is going on. It's not that we're at peace. We're engaged in warfare daily now, and it's been endless since 9/11, 2001. We're in our 18th year of consecutive warfare, unending war. And I remember when after the 9/11 attacks, a lot of us took to the streets to protest and say, no, don't invade Iraq, don't invade Afghanistan. And I remember,
And got spit on for that too.
and I remember, I don't know about that, I didn't get spit on, but I will tell a story. I was in front of the Federal Building in Raleigh, holding a sign. It was very provocative. It said, "Love your enemies." But I got interviewed by a reporter, and he said, "You know, you guys, everybody in the whole world is really mad about 9/11 and the terrorist attacks, and there's this handful of you here having this protest. Like, why are you doing this?" And I said, "Well, Jesus was never on the side of the mob." And that was the quote that he used.
Yeah,
Wow.
and it was, that war was very popular at the beginning there. People were so afraid and
You notice
feared.
that the UNC basketball team has never taken the American flags off their uniforms.
Oh, I didn't know that.
That's
Yeah, yeah,
it's the war is forever now.
the war, yeah.
The war is forever.
And what people unfortunately don't put two and two together, that war machine and that war budget is siphoning off, and then they say we don't have money for education, we don't have money for universal health care. And it's obscene the amount that goes into that. Patrick, we need more people doing what you did and trying to remind us of what a powder keg we're living on. How we're, every day, it's a miracle that we're here.
Yeah, but I'm thinking probably all our listeners agree with us.
Well, they probably.
We're not speaking to the choir out there in Radio
Well,
Land, are we?
No, well, we're on YouTube. Hopefully, maybe somebody will stumble
Right.
Yeah.
on. But thank you so much for coming, and thank you for what you do, and good luck to you in your court